Do you have a place from your childhood that you can still see very vividly in your mind? Mine is a house on the corner of Elm and 10th Street in Lincoln, Illinois. And that street, the 10th Street actually came to a T at the front of the house, and then it would jag around the corner of the lot and continue on. So if you were driving west down 10th Street, I believe it was west, if my direction is correct, that part of 10th Street was brick. And it was really just very, had this grand feeling of driving down the street with the brick and these big, tall, older trees. In the homes on that street were big and really nice and older. But you could see the house on the corner of Elm and 10th as the whole time you're driving down that portion of 10th Street. That house holds some of my favorite memories, and it is the place where my very first best friend lived. And I absolutely loved spending weekends there. My grandma French was born in 1900, exactly 1900. So by the time I was born, she was in her early 70s. So she had seen so many things, so many inventions, so many changes in our country throughout that time. Her first husband had passed away, and she married then my grandpa, which he was born in 1906. They had only one child, which was obviously my father. My grandpa was a retired farmer. And then once he retired, they moved inside the city limits at some point. In the neighborhood where they lived, there were lots of other older couples. Some were also just women. They were widowed. So my grandpa would take care of their yards, mow their grass, take care of their gardens, their flowers, whatever. But he also had his own little flower, like he planted lots of flowers around their house. I absolutely loved that. But my grandma kind of would always joke around about those ladies being my grandpa's girlfriends, and we just kind of like have a little smirk on our face when she'd talk about it, because those ladies would send him home with cookies, zucchini bread, or whatever. Their friendship was just very playful. They had a very kind of orneriness to their banter. One of my favorite things, they had in the front of the house off the living room, there was a parlor room, and in there she had a player piano. They had it set up somehow. I don't know if they bought it this way or my grandpa had it converted, but it wasn't the kind where you had to pump it to make it go. It had a vacuum system of some sort in there. It literally sounded like a vacuum cleaner when you turn it on. And then it would have a switch for a tempo that you could change the tempo or make it go forward really fast or rewind it. And then there was these scrolls, these boxes with scrolls in it that had all these little holes in that would go over. If you think like almost like a harmonica kind of, I guess, I don't know how to explain it, but it had like there was a metal plate in the upright part of the piano that the paper would go over, and then that would correlate into whatever keys were being played on. And it was just the coolest thing. I was so fascinated by it. So we'd sit in there and she would play different songs. Obviously, most of them were very old songs. And also in that room, she had a collection of dolls. At one point, I think she had close to 200 dolls when she passed away. But she would go to, like my aunts would come and pick her up, and they would go to yard sales, and that was her favorite thing. She would go looking for dolls, and she would didn't matter if they were in good shape or not. If they were in bad shape, she'd clean them up. She'd try to figure out a way to get different clothes for them. I don't think she made them herself, but Maybe she did. I don't remember exactly how, but she would fix it up and then put it on display in this inner parlor room. And they were all over. They were all over the furniture. There were the sofa in there they never used, in just shelves on side tables, wherever. One of the dolls was a prayer doll, and her hands were together in a prayer, and she was in a kneeling position. And you push a button on her belly, and she would say the prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep." And that's how I learned that prayer, was from that doll. And every night I would say that prayer. And to this day, I'm in my 50s. To this day, I still say that prayer every night when I go to sleep. I said that prayer every night to my children, while they were growing up, or while they were little. I suppose I didn't do it when they were older. But anyway, I did. That was just something that obviously has stuck with me my whole entire life. My grandma also, something was really interesting, was she would list, she had scanners. They lived about 3 blocks or so from a hospital. And she'd hear sirens. She would turn on the scanner and she would listen to whatever was going on. I just thought that was really funny. I don't know why. And then at Christmas, they had my absolute favorite Christmas tree of all times, and I am bound and determined at some point I will own one in my lifetime. They had the vintage, well, now it's considered vintage. It wasn't vintage then, but the aluminum Christmas trees where the whole tree was like the middle pole and all the branches were metal, and then it looked like tinsel instead of like what an artificial tree would look like, the pine needles. It was all like little tinsel. Or garland, I guess, more like, not tinsel, but it was silver. And then it had a slow moving color wheel that would turn, and it had 4 different color panels. So it'd be like red, blue, green, and orange. And the spotlight would go on the tree, and then it would just slowly turn. And so the color of the tree, so there's no actual light on the tree, but the color of the tree would change as the color wheel went around. And I would just sit in that room in the parlor and just watch the tree and watch the colors change on the tree for felt like forever. So my grandma was always this very calm, steady, grounded energy to her. She never tried to put on a show. I don't remember her ever getting upset about anything. She, like I said, she almost had kind of a little bit of orneriness to her, which played really well with my grandpa. But, everyone has that rock in the family, and she was definitely the rock of her family. So when my brother and I started racing quarter midgets, which my dad was from, that was my dad's hometown, Lincoln, Illinois. And there was or is a quarter midget track there. It was a few miles outside of town. And when my brother and I started racing there, we obviously were going to Lincoln every weekend during race season, which was basically like April through to September-ish. So we spent a lot of time there, get there and then on a Friday night and go to the races Saturday and go home on Sunday. There were times where we just, kind of just sat around and we would, we'd order pizza from Gazzardo's. I still crave that pizza, but my dad he would want to pay for it, but my grandma a lot of times didn't want him to. And so she would slip me a $20 bill to pay the pizza guy when it came. Like, don't you let your dad pay for this. And then we would often play dominoes. And my grandma loved when she would want us to be partners, me and her. And so just things like that. Like, I just felt like we were kind of like a team. And I would spend a lot of time sitting on the couch next to her chair. And we would just talk, for hours at a time, it seemed. The house was 2 stories. The second level, it was kind of like a little with an efficiency type apartment, a small apartment. So he had a tenant up there. But then every so often, my grandpa would have to paint the house, which forever never had been the traditional old white house. And my dad thought, he's getting older. I don't want him up and down on a ladder. And he paid to have their house sided. So when the siding salesperson comes and they give him all these different color choices, my grandpa was just adamant, like, it's just going to be white. We're doing white. And I could tell because my grandma was just kind of like, again, she had this little fun side to her. And she asked me for some reason, what color did I think they should go with? And I picked this soft yellow color. And there were a couple of reasons for that. One, yellow is always my favorite color. When I was pretty young, the house that we lived in when I first was born, and for many years, first years of my life, the owners of that house we rented, they wanted to paint the interior walls and gave us the option of picking colors. And they asked me what color I wanted my room to be. And I picked yellow. So I had this soft yellow colored room. Loved it. Then right kind of before my grandparents are going to have their house sided, my best friend, their family had their house sided, which they had also had this older white house on a corner lot. And they went with this buttercup yellow color with white trim. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I freaking love that house. I love that color. It looks so happy. And so that's like, my grandpa was just, no way, we are not doing a yellow colored house. Who puts yellow on their house? And I don't know how my grandma ended up winning out, but she went with yellow. And well, they went with yellow, I guess I should say. But once it was done, people would stop and tell them how great their house looked and what a great, looks so good at, with the new color, whatever. So my grandma just got such a kick out of that my grandpa didn't want white house, but everybody loved the yellow house. But the other kind of fun opposites of my grandparents was, like I said, my dad, Lincoln was my dad's hometown, and he had actually raced himself there when he was living there. And I guess my grandma had went to go watch him race, and his helmet was painted this cherry red color, and he had an accident of some sort. I don't know if he got upside down or not, but his helmet flew off. I don't remember if the chin strap broke or if his helmet just wasn't on tight enough or what, but his helmet flew off. And she said the lady sitting next to her fainted because they thought that was my dad's head, like, because it was red and flying through the air. But yeah, it just never phased her. Like, it just like, she's so even keeled. And then when my brother and I started racing, the opposite part of that was my grandfather's opinion about racing was that racing is foolish. It was, you're spending, and obviously because they lived through the entire Depression era, and he was a farmer and all those things. So for him, it was, you're wasting all this money on something foolish and dangerous. But my grandma felt it was just exciting and adventurous. So when my brother and I started racing, now my grandma didn't drive. I don't know if she ever drove. She might have, but my entire time that I ever knew them, she did not drive. My grandpa drove her everywhere. Somebody would pick her up. And so she would have to ask my grandpa to take her out to the track to see my brother and I race. And they didn't come out a whole lot, but they'd come out, maybe a couple times a year, once a year. And the last year that I was racing quarter midgets was when I was really starting to kind of get the hang of it and getting a lot better. And so I quite often would come home with at least one trophy, whether it was the heat race or the feature. And so she started collecting my trophies, and she put them on their TV in the living room. And so that way she could brag about her grandkids whenever, they had visitors or whatever. And to the fact that she wanted those trophies so much, to the fact at one point, I don't know why, I just decided I didn't want to race one weekend. I mean, we were there, but I told my dad, I'm like, I don't know, I just don't want to race this weekend. And my grandma was upset. like not mad. Like I said, she never got mad, but she kind of was just like, let me know that she was disappointed that I wasn't going to race and be able to bring her home, whether it was a ribbon or a trophy that weekend. So, she wasn't just cheering from the sidelines. She was very proud of us, and wanted to save the pieces of our wins to keep it home with her. So my grandma passed away very early in my junior year of high school. I was 16 years old at the time. And that was my very first hard death that I had to deal with. My parents were divorced before I started kindergarten. But my mom always was very fond of my grandparents. So my mom and her sister came to the service, and I was, of course, sitting up front with the family. And I remember when the service was over and people were walking by the casket to kind of like say their last goodbyes or whatever. And when I stood up and I looked at the casket, I couldn't walk up there. I just remember thinking, this is the last time I'm ever going to see her. And I lost it. And I turned around and there's my mom, and I went straight to her and sat in the chair next to her and just cried like a baby in her arms, at 16 years old. I lost my best friend. That was my first best friend. And I had never known life without her. And I thought, she was the first phone number I ever memorized. And all the moments that we shared and were special to me were gone. That that was just, she was such a solid foundation to my life. And throughout the years, I lost many other family members. All my grandparents, my mom, my dad disappeared, and so I became much more accustomed to losing loved ones in my life. And sometime in my 30s, like maybe in my mid 30s, I started having this dream. Now, I didn't dream of anyone else. All the other people that I lost, including my mom, who was also very special to me. I never had any dreams about other people of relatives that I had lost. But yet in my late 30s, I started having this dream, and was very vivid. It was a dream that my grandma French, she had died, but she had come back to life, like basically from the grave type of thing, not in a zombie type of way or any weird thing like that. Like she was literally living, breathing person in that house on the corner of Elm and 10th Street. I could see her in the kitchen, and I could just feel her presence. Like nothing was different. I can't really, there's no way for me to articulate it. And I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, like my grandma's alive. And I would wake up from that dream, and it would take me a little bit to actually question myself. Like, wait, is my grandma really alive again? Like, how is that even possible? Like, why would I even question that? Why would I not realize that was a dream when I woke up? But every time I have the dream, I would feel like, oh my gosh, my grandma's alive. And then I'm like, what are you talking about? That's a dream. So not only that's the only person I ever had a dream about like that or at all in any kind of situation or capacity, but what? Like it was so, it felt, I could feel her. And the fact that I didn't only have that dream just once, I'd have it like a couple times a year. So in 2011, I think it was, that what I went to what they call a metaphysical fair. I went with two of my best friends and who were very much into all those things, and I was just very curious. So they had all kinds of different booths. Some people were mediums, some people were psychic, some people whatever, and some were just other things, like they were selling crystals or I don't know, like you name it. If it was in the metaphysical realm, it was at this fair. And I just walked around and just kind of took everything in. And I'm looking at all the different booths, stopping at different tables. And finally I decided, I picked this one lady and I put my name down for what she called a channeling. So she channels a message for you of some sort. And when I got to her, I told her about the dream that I had about my grandma. And I said, I just feel like it's a dream. Like the fact that I'm having it, I've had it multiple times, and how real it feels when I wake up. Like I'm still feel like it's real when I wake up. I felt like it's trying to tell me something. And so she did a channel and she said that my grandma French, the dream is about my grandma French is telling me that she is my spirit guide and so therefore she is living through me. So that's how she has come back to life and in that way, is that she is living through me, my experience, and she's guiding me in my life. And when she said that, I just like, oh, well, of course, she was my very first best friend. She was my very first hardest death. Like I was so devastated when she died, and it just made sense. I thought, well, of course she's my spirit guide. Like she was my bestie. And I never had that dream after that. It was like I had the answer, so I didn't need to have the dream anymore. Like I got the answer. I still think about that lot on the corner of Elm and 10th Street. The house that appeared at the end of the road, like was just waiting for you, the buttercup yellow with a white trim. Every once in a while, I'll even look it up on Google Street View from time to time just to see if it's still there. And it is. It's still there. It's still that yellow color with a white trim. And I think about the happy home, and inside of it, how a woman lived there who showed me what it looks like to be grounded and fully present in your life, to show up for adventure and the joyful and small, beautiful moments. She is the reason that I know that the people who love us most don't leave us. They actually get closer. So as always, I have a couple of free resources for you. The links are in the show notes. I have a link to my visualization guide, which is a method of intentional creation for various things in your life. And also, there's a link to my newsletter, Hello Possibility. If you subscribe to that, every Tuesday that will go to your email, and it's similar stories and talk to me about how to build a life that you really, truly love. So thank you so much for spending time with me. I truly appreciate you being here. Until next time, just know that you are always in the driver's seat of your life.